What up, TCK Potters? Very happy to be back with you with another episode 387 of the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Sky Guasco. You can find me on Twitter at my name, Sky Guasco, SkyGuasco. Also on Instagram at fantasyfootball_TCK Pod, on TikTok and Facebook as well. Have a very special episode today. We have a guest all the way from Canada, our first Canadian guest. Very excited about that. We've been trying to get him on for quite a long time, and we're finally able to do that. And, of course, my man Bobby Lamarco, a.k.a. Fantasy Football X Factor, back with another episode. Today we are doing the rookie rundown for three different divisions. We're going to do the NFC West, the NFC East, and the NFC South. And we're going to just talk about the rookie impacts of these guys that are going to be immediate impacts on their team and what it might mean for some of these veterans coming in here. Without any further ado, let's welcome in our boys today. I want to welcome in my man, Bobby Lamarco, a.k.a. Fantasy Football X Factor. Y'all are very familiar. And for the first time on the TCK pod, at least with me, I'm not sure if you and Lucas have done an episode in the past, but I want to welcome in my man Bush from the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush, it's been a long time coming, brother. How are you? And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Sky. Yeah, we've kind of run in the same circles for like a year and a half now and never, chopped it up on the mic before. So yeah, it's been a while. I've never actually been on with you or with Lucas. So this is my first appearance. You can find everything that we're doing over at the fantasystockexchange.com. You can find our YouTube channel, Fantasy Stock Exchange. You just search that and you'll find us. My Twitter on the screen at Football Stock, and my co-host Danny Football 59. Yeah, we're always doing football stuff. We got tons of dynasty content pumping out this week. We've been putting out like daily videos for the last week and a half now since the NFL draft happened and since right before the draft. So got a lot of content pumping out.
I love that, man. You guys are very, very busy over on that side. Of course, our Lucas Kaser, also part of the Fantasy Stock Exchange from time to time as well. We've also had Tyler Moss on the program too. So we have kind of run in the same circles for quite a while. So this is going to be a fun episode. We have kind of a series here of the rookie rundowns. And I mean, I'm not shy that I'm a 49ers fan. The Candlestick Kids podcast is named after their former stadium in San Francisco, where I grew up going to Niners and Giants games. Also, belated happy birthday to my man Willie Mays, legendary, living legend, San Francisco, New York baseball Giants legend. 90 years young from my man Willie Mays happened yesterday. But Candlestick Park is where I grew up, so I'm a 49ers fan. Bobby is originally from New Jersey. Now he is in sunny California, but he's a Giants fan. And Bush, you're up in Canada, but you're a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan coming off of the Super Bowl, of course. So congratulations there. So we're going to have some fun here. We're just going to break down our respective divisions. I'm going to take the West. Bobby's going to take the East. Bush is going to take the South. And we're going to talk about the fantasy relevant players off the bat and the skill position players and what it might mean, coaching changes, what it means for fantasy, any vacancies, vacated targets, run game opportunities, all of that stuff. Bobby, I'm going to let you kick it off here. We're going to start in the East. I'll let you take whichever teams in a row you'd like to do. We'll go team by team, break down one of the teams. And again, we only kind of have 2-3 names per team, because we're talking specifically from these rookies, and then we'll get feedback from us and we'll carry on. So, Bobby, why don't you kick it off, my man, and start with the NFC East?
Yeah, let's talk about the Cowboys. And I think when we were looking just strictly from a fantasy football perspective, the first – and I think this is kind of a plug for myself, but I recently put out a couple posts about draft value and the likelihood of a player picked in what round is going to become fantasy relevant. And what I realized from my analysis was – it really does matter. Like first, day 1 and day 2 picks are much more likely to become fantasy relevant. So when I look at the Dallas Cowboys, they of course didn't have much need in the weaponry department. They have, of course, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, and company, and Mari Cooper, of course. So with Dak Prescott coming back, they did not draft a single fantasy relevant player. Even on the offensive side, they did not draft anybody day 1 or day 2. So that's just something I thought was notable. But when I'm looking at from a offensive scheme perspective, I love Mike McCarthy going into his second year, but something to keep in mind in the back of our heads, Dan Quinn's coming in to change that defense a little bit. Now, the reason why I bring that up is they had averaged 50 attempts per game the first 4 weeks with Dak Prescott. That's an unreal amount of volume. I don't expect that to happen again. Based on some of the things they tried to do on defense, they based all their early round picks on defense. They brought in a new defensive coordinator. So I think that's going to impact the offense because they're not going to need to be as pass heavy as they were that first month of the season. plus their offensive line. Yes, they did not invest anybody on offensive line, but they are getting back Zach Martin for a full season, Tyron Smith, Lando Collins, a bunch of guys. Pretty much their only true hole now on the offensive line is going to be the center position, and they brought in Connor McGovern, who was the PFF number 9 center in 2019. So I think there is a lot of room for optimism on the offensive line that just comes away from without even drafting anybody on the offensive line. And my final point too is I just want to keep this in the back of our minds for dynasty purposes and for just anybody who's looking for a keeper league. Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz, for example, are both going to be free agents next year. Zeke Elliott does have an opt-out clause. So Tony Pollard, keep that in the back of your mind. He does have an opt-out for next year. So that's just a couple things. So I think my biggest winner when I was looking at all this could be a guy like Blake Jarwin. I did talk about this on our winners and losers episode, but the fact that he could take that role, and even next year, if they lose Michael Gallup, if they lose Dalton Schultz, that should open up more opportunities for Blake Jarwin. So he's someone that could be a dynasty asset, someone undervalued right now.
Bush, the Cowboys only drafted one single skill position player in the 5th round, Simi Fehoko, and he's out of Stanford, wide receiver. Again, they're loaded at wide receiver, obviously. So there's not really a lot to mention here for the Cowboys, but do you have anything to mention with any of the changes they've made so far?
No, I think I'd push back a little bit on the Dan Quinn hire. To me, it kind of seems pretty similar to Mike Nolan's hire last year, kind of a has-been defensive coordinator that is running a kind of an outdated scheme, in my opinion. So I don't expect their passing numbers to be the ungaudy, like 50 attempts per game that they were when Dak Prescott was last healthy. But I still think this is a bottom 10 defense in the NFL because I think, especially when you look at what happened with Atlanta's defense, once Dan Quinn was fired, it was a top 10 unit in points per game. Once Dan Quinn was gone from there with the same personnel, they still had a rookie corner and AJ Terrell starting back there. They still had Kendall Sheffield, who's a complete turnstile in coverage. I just think the Dan Quinn scheme, the Seattle Seahawks scheme, doesn't work unless you have Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman and Bobby Wagner to operate it, which the Cowboys do not.
Yeah,
I like that.
That's a good point. And that's a good point too, because another thing I have in my notes here is that since 2019, they lost their 2 starting cornerbacks in Dallas. Chidobe Awuzie is now with the Bengals, and they lost Byron Jones, of course, last year. They haven't really replaced him. They did bring in a rookie cornerback in the 2nd round, but to be honest with you, they don't have a lot of talent in the secondary. So that's a great point. This could be another, pass-heavy defense you could tackle through the pass game.
Okay, Bobby, who's the next team in the NFC East?
That'd be my New York Giants. I know Kadarius Toney's kind of the guy everyone's talking about, and I'm just going to preface this whole thing with 2021 is going to be a crowded offense. I mean, Daniel Jones has not proven that he can support that many weapons. Jason Garrett's offenses from back in the day did not have that many fantasy relevant pass catchers. So I understand for 2021, Kadarius Toney seems like a little bit of a head scratcher. But the one thing I will say is that the Giants do have some moving parts. Evan Ingram and Sterling Shepard actually has a potential out in 2022. Evan Ingram's a free agent. So there's going to be some potential opportunities for Kadarius Toney to take over that slot role permanently. For example, if he produces well and they think he could take over for Shepard. So I think this is more of a 2022 and beyond kind of signing. For 2021, I'm just not interested. It's too much going on. Can't forget about Kenny Golladay. This team does have 134 vacated targets from last year, but at the same time, I think the one thing I was thinking for 2021 with Jason Garrett was, remind me of Tavon Austin a little bit when they tried to bring in Tavon Austin and do all these little gadget plays, and Jason Garrett just couldn't figure it out. I'm not really excited for Toney in that sense for year 1, but I think he could take the full-time slot role beyond that. Plus, you have the return of Saquon Barkley. On the offensive line piece, they did release Kevin Zeitler. They replaced him with Zach Fulton, which is a downgrade. They do get Nate Solder back as well. So there is some movement up front, but they did once they fired Mark Colombo last year, it started to come together a little bit on the ground. The one thing that is key, they did not address this necessarily on the draft, but they brought in Adoree Jackson. Now they have him across from James Bradbury. They have a great duo. So this could be a very defense focused team and run. So I think that overall it's going to be tough for these pass catchers to really exceed expectations, especially with so many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, Gary Brightwell also comes in from Arizona in the 6th round of running back. Daniel Jones has had a number of excuses so far, and I'm not going to downplay the guy too much, but he's been injured. He's had fumble issues. Saquon's been injured 2 years in a row. all their receivers and Evan Ingram have been injured for the last couple of years. Their defense has been horrendous. They were better in the back half of last season, but Daniel Jones has kind of been able to point the finger, not that he is per se, but it's been able to not put all the attention on him. He has all the weapons now. The defense is getting better. They bring in Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney for another weapon. Saquon's back healthy. If he can't get it done this year, he's going to be in trouble. Bush, anything to add with the Giants?
No, Bobby basically covered all the points that I would have probably added with the Tavon Austin reference from Jason Garrett. We really saw them commit to Tavon Austin for some reason and think that he was going to be a big part of the Cowboys offense, at least from what Dallas was saying that year. And Kadarius Toney, from a dynasty perspective, has always been a guy. There's a couple rookies every single year at wide receiver that you just know aren't going to make a big impact in their rookie season. And I think with Kadarius Toney, especially coming from Florida, where he was like a quarterback when he went there initially, he's only been playing the position a couple of years. And that's a good reason why his like production was really down for his years at Florida. So I think with Kadarius Toney coming in, it's probably he's a replacement for Sterling Shepard when he does have that out in 2022. And he's probably their full-time slot by that point. And I guess by then we'll probably know how Daniel Jones is going to fare in the NFL. He's kind of at the Baker Mayfield tipping point where we saw Mayfield take a big step forward this year after having a down sophomore year. Kind of the same thing with Daniel Jones. Hopefully he can do what Mayfield did and take this step forward.
Absolutely. Bobby, who's next?
Philadelphia Eagles. I think you got to be excited about what the Eagles did. Of course, from the top down, bringing in Nick Sirianni. I know it's the question's still on him with Shane Steichen coming over as the offensive coordinator, but these guys actually have familiarity with each other from the Chargers days. They both were on the Ken Whisenhunt and, of course, Frank Wright. So I do like the offensive philosophy that's coming over for the Eagles. But the biggest problem that was glaring for the Eagles last year was just everybody got hurt. The offensive line, the weapons, everybody was out. And they have really done a good job addressing some of those needs. But some of those needs have been addressed by just getting healthy. Of course, Brandon Brooks, the PFF #1 run blocking guard from last year, is coming back. You know, you're going to have Andre Dillard coming back, former first-round pick in 2019. Actually, a fun stat, only one of 5 offensive linemen from 2019 that was their main starters actually played over 10 games in 2020. So you're talking about 4/5 of their line didn't even play, over half the games essentially. So I think getting healthy on the offensive line. Then they drafted Landon Dickerson. I've heard some good things about this kid. He could probably play guard year 1 and then kick over to place Jason Kelsey at center at some point. So that's just good news long term. They did bring in a new defensive coordinator from the Colts secondaries coach, Jonathan Gannon, but same time, they haven't really done anything to address the secondary problems. They did have they have Darius Slay, but he got cooked in the second half against some notable guys like DK Metcalf, which I think is, fine. We're okay with that. It's not too terrible. But another thing I thought was notable too is, of course, Zach Ertz. Is that looming? Is he going to get released? They do have an out for him to, eliminate some of his later cap hits. So I think it makes sense for them to get rid of Zach Ertz. But another notable name is Dallas Goedert's actually a free agent next year. So it makes a lot of sense for them to cut ties with Zach Ertz so they can re-up with Dallas Goedert for the future. So I think that's something that's notable for this team. But, of course, bring in Devonta Smith, first-round pick, gives them that elite guy. I did ask this question. This might be a good question for the group to kind of answer. And I think I asked actually Matt Harmon because I thought, hey, why not add him on Twitter? I thought maybe he'd answer, but maybe he will. Is the biggest problem with Devonta Smith or smaller receivers in general is to get off press? Is that why they don't succeed in the NFL? Because I've heard Smith is awesome at getting off press somehow. So I think my question really is, if Devonta Smith is going to be a true #1, he's going to play on the outside. He's going to have to get. And how do you guys feel about that pick? Is he going to be able to succeed on the outside off bigger corners, especially in a division now that has William Jackson and James Bradbury, which is guys they're going to see twice a year? So that's kind of just my question for you guys, how you think about that, if he's going to be able to succeed. But when you look at the offense as a whole, it's Devonta Smith now. You have Jalen Reagor, Dallas Goedert. Of course, I think Jalen Hurts, as much as it's kind of a obvious thing to say, I think the mobile quarterback, he's a rock solid QB1 this year.
Bush, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, I think with the press coverage argument, to me, that's like a lazy argument on Devonta Smith. There's 2 ways to get off press coverage. The way I see it is you can get off press coverage with physicality, like someone like Jamar Chase, how he would get off press coverage. And you can also get off press coverage with tremendous feet, which is how Devonta Smith wins. And if you guys remember Chad Johnson, that's how he won. And that's how he got off press coverage. And he was a slighter receiver as well. He was like 6'3", like 180 pounds. From a BMI standpoint, pretty comparable to Devonta Smith. So I think that's the way he's going to win in the NFL in terms of playing on the outside. The number one thing for me with Devontae Smith is it reminds me a lot of A.J. Brown his rookie year. We kind of were like so-so on the landing spot. Still got question marks about Jalen Hurts as a passer, but when you're a young receiver and your primary job, if we're out on playing recess or at recess playing football right now, the primary job of a wide receiver is to get open and catch the football. And nobody does it in this class better than Devontae Smith. And the top 3 receiving yardage leaders for the Philadelphia Eagles last year all had under 600 receiving yards. Travis Fulgham, Greg Ward, and Jalen Reagor, and all of them ranked outside the top 60 in average yards of separation. So I think if nothing else, Devontae Smith will get open. He will catch the ball. And honestly, that's all the Philadelphia Eagles receiving core has needed the last couple of years.
Nice.
I think that's an excellent breakdown. I have nothing to add on that. I do think the more and more I get used to Devontae Smith in the NFL, Devontae Adams is another player. Now he's a bigger body receiver, of course, but every broadcast you've seen the last 3 years, Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, they highlight his feet. He is one of the NFL receivers that does not use his hands. When they play press coverage, he does not use his hands to fight off cornerbacks. He uses his feet, and his feet are so immaculate, he's able to get open. And look, Aaron Rodgers is amazing. Devontae Adams is amazing. But when he catches the ball with 2 yards of separation, that is very, very rare in the NFL. And Devontae Adams makes it happen routinely. And I'm not saying Devontae Smith is Devontae Adams by any means yet. But if he's got the footwork, he can get by those guys because he's not going to go through anybody. But I think he can go around them quickly, and then it's a foot race, and he's going to win most of those battles there.
Yeah, and you saw that with AB and Stephon Diggs and some of those other guys that have like that twitchy route running nuance to them. And his own teammate, Jerry Jeudy, is the exact same way.
Love it. Bobby, who's the last one here?
Washington football team. I think it's just say Ryan Fitzpatrick team now. I'm just all in on that. Really excited for him. When I was looking at this, though, like it's good to see they made some investments because that defense is legit. I mean, we all know that. But then they brought in William Jackson. I brought that up a couple times already. But that's important because now they just need to focus on the offense. Obviously, the QB carousel is kind of – that's over and done with. Ryan Fitzpatrick brings some stability to that team, which is kind of ironic. 5 years ago, I don't think any of us would have said that, but he's really improved his game over the last couple of years. So I like Ryan Fitzpatrick coming in, but the De'Ami Brown, I know we talked a little bit about him. I think he's very notable because one of the things I was thinking in the back of my head was Adam Humphries got signed in. Adam Humphries is like that prototypical slot guy. Does that mean Curtis Samuel is going to have to go back out wide and play more on the outside like he did 2 years ago? Or with De'Ami Brown, if he's the one that emerges, can he play on the outside, kick Samuel back into the slot? I think that's something I'll be watching very closely because Samuel played very well in the interior last year, and I think that would be a better suited role for him than playing just primarily outside. So that's something I'll watch. If Humphries becomes the main slot guy, it could be something that we have to factor in when we look at a guy like Curtis Samuel. But they invested a second-round pick in the offensive line. They also traded for Eric Flowers, who actually as a Giants fan, this burns a little, but he resurrected his career in Washington a couple of years ago as a guard. He comes over now. So they're investing in that offensive line. And based on their other moves, like really, they have Antonio Gibson, which I think a lot of us are excited, that CMC type of player in the scheme that's run by the Turner and the head coach, Ron Rivera. Sorry, I blanked there. My screen just turned off. But one of the guys that I think was kind of notable, too, is Logan Thomas is a free agent next year. Is he going to get a re-signing here? Because there's a lot of mouths to feed. It's going to be interesting with a good defense like the Washington football team has. I'm interested to see, is there going to be enough pass on to support Curtis Samuel, De'Ami Brown, to a lesser extent Adam Humphries, of course, Terry McLaurin, who's the alpha, Logan Thomas, Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissick. I just think that, a lot of these offenses, you kind of throw a question mark. So I guess I'll throw it back to you guys. How do you feel about the room being a little too crowded? Do you think Ryan Fitzpatrick can support maybe 2 or 3 pass catchers this year?
I have been super infatuated with De'Ami Brown for this entire offseason. He's been my guy, and I've said this on the podcast a few times. We all know about the big names. Give me a deeper name at each position. Who are you feeling? I've literally typed De'Ami Brown on like 50 different comments threads just because I love his separation. Now he goes in the 3rd round. I know he has question marks. People are worried that he's only a one-trick pony, whatever. I believe he's more than that eventually. Bush, I know you've done a lot with rookies previous to the draft on field in college. Can you stoke my fire in De'Ami Brown, or am I a little too hyped?
He was my wide receiver 6 pre-draft. I had him ahead of Rondell Moore. I had him ahead of Terrace Marshall from a film grade perspective. I love De'Ami Brown. So
I'd love to hear
am
that.
all
Awesome.
the way on board with this take. And when you think about the type of receivers that Ryan Fitzpatrick has gravitated towards in his past couple stops, you think about Deshaun Jackson and Mike Evans in Tampa Bay. You think about how he resurrected Devontae Parker's career a couple of years ago. He likes guys that stretch the field. That's just the way that he operates. And De'Ami Brown isn't a 4-2 runner. He's not going to stretch the field from a speed perspective, but he's deceptively fast. He's a long strider, and he's physical at the catch point too. So De'Ami Brown, let's not pretend that Curtis Samuel was productive when Ron Rivera was the head coach of Carolina. He was the guy that we were talking about, all his air yards that were unrealized and stuff like that. Like with Curtis Samuel, we really only saw him break onto the scene and reach his full potential this year when Matt Rule came in. So he's going back to the same coaching staff that misused him all those years in Carolina. I'm not saying he's going to be useless, but he's a guy that's always going to be kind of capped around that 80 to 100 target range anyway. And if you're giving 140, 150 to Terry McLaurin, there should be plenty of room for De'Ami Brown to establish a role in this offense. And hey, if any injuries happen to McLaurin or to Samuel, I think De'Ami Brown could really, really spark a connection with Ryan Fitzpatrick and build some momentum going into his second year from a dynasty perspective.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I love that.
Just my one last thought about that too. That's the exact reason why I'm thinking maybe Brown could take a starting role on the outside, kick Samuel back inside, because they use Jarius Wright all the time in the slot under Ron Rivera. So this would make a lot of sense based on everything you're saying. But Adam Humphries is like, he's good. He's like a good NFL. I guess he's like a poor man's Cole Beasley, but he's a very productive slot guy. So I'm just curious to see how you guys thought about that. But I think Brown is definitely someone that's now on my radar.
Yeah, he's a big training camp buzz guy. Like, I always say, coaches, when how you hear like, oh, this guy's like in the best shape of his life, or this guy's ready to be a workhorse. When you hear it once, it doesn't mean anything. But when you hear it in patterns from multiple sources, from coaches, from quarterbacks, from other teammates in the position room, from their position coaches, that's when you have a true like training camp buzz. And that's when you get a Darren Waller. And that's when you get a Terry McLaurin his rookie year. And if you start hearing some things about De'Ami Brown like that, he's a guy I would really, really pay attention to come training camp time, because if he's able to establish a connection with Fitzpatrick and he's getting a lot of buzz, it would not shock me at all if he surpasses Curtis Samuel on the depth chart in the pecking order really fast.
Oh, I love that. I love that call, man. I've been hyped on De'Ami Brown for a long time. I'm glad to hear someone else jump on the wagon.
And by the way, you're not trashing those reports, because I can't wait for those reports. I can't wait to hear how so good some guy looks in shorts. I'm looking forward to it. We
got the preseason this year, so we can see them in preseason games too, which is beautiful.
That is true. All right, before we get to Bush breaking down the NFC South, we're going to take a quick commercial break. I'm going to kick you guys off, get some water. Feel free to take a quick break here for about 30 seconds. I'm going to jump in and give a shout out to our friends at the Jersey Jungle. Ladies and gentlemen, you are no stranger to the Jersey Jungle if you follow the TCK pod here. Bush has 5 jerseys that I can see. I have 2 behind me, but I've got about 30 of them total. The Jersey Jungle on Instagram, the Jersey Jungle, DM them. Look through their stock. They have every sport imaginable. They have football, baseball, hockey, soccer, basketball, custom, home and away, throwback jerseys, rookie jerseys. They are working on NFL rookies right now for the NFL. I already have 2 orders getting ready to be put in for the Jersey Jungle. So hit them up on Instagram. Look through their inventory at the Jersey Jungle. Use the promo code TCK to receive 10% off of 1 or 2 jerseys and 15% off of 3 jerseys. The best part of this is they're authentic jerseys. They're stitch and twill. They are very, very high quality jersey. I would not be selling you garbage. I promise you. I have many, many jerseys, and they're very clean. You can see Julio Jones and Larry Fitzgerald, 2 future Hall of Famers, behind me today, and you've seen all the jerseys in the past. These jerseys start at $65 on the Jersey Jungle, and you get 10 or 15% using the promo code TCK. So quite literally, you can get 3 jerseys for just about the same it would take to be 1 jersey on NFL.com at about $120 a pop. So if you like the Fitzgerald behind me, stitch and twill, you like the Julio Jones behind me, again, it's stitched on, not pressed on. Feel free to hit up the Jersey Jungle. Shouts out to my boy Trenton and the rest of the crew over there. We're going to bring the boys back here once again. My man Bush coming in from Canada this evening and host of the Fantasy Stock Exchange. longtime friend of the TCK pod, but first time on. And Bobby Lamarco, of course, fantasy football X Factor. All right, we just got through the NFC East, breaking down the 4 teams. Bush, I'm going to turn it over to you, buddy. Go ahead and run us down the NFC South. Let's go team by team.
Yeah, real quick. I actually have a jersey from the Jersey Jungle. You didn't know this about me, but I have a Jackie Robinson 42, and it's got a bunch of custom stitching on it or whatever. My buddy stole it from me, so I can't actually show you it, but I do have it, and I can attest that it's a pretty high quality jersey, and it's got some cool stitching.
Get that jersey back. A Jackie Robinson, go get that. If you want to leave the podcast right now, we'll wait a few hours for you to get that jersey and come back if you want to. Jackie Robinson just celebrated Jackie Robinson Day in Major League Baseball, April 15th, of course. Don't get me started on baseball, bro. I'm a baseball fiend, but that's awesome, man. Shouts out Jersey Jungle. Bush approved. Appreciate you, man. Take us through the NFC South.
I'm deciding which team I want to start with, but I'm going to start with the team that hoisted a Lombardi trophy because I feel like bragging that my team won the Super Bowl for the first time since, I was able to functionally understand football. And we did it in very convincing fashion, as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers often do in Super Bowls. From a fantasy perspective, we had a couple of additions that are relevant for fantasy, but I would say more so for dynasty purposes. Neither of these guys are probably anybody that anyone just playing in redraft leagues need to keep their eye on. But Kyle Trask, the quarterback from Florida, if you're a college football fan, you probably know who Kyle Trask is. He was, I believe it was 3rd or 4th in the Heisman voting this past year, but he's a very productive quarterback in college. He's a guy that is in the mold of Tom Brady. He's a point guard. He's the guy that will put the ball where it needs to be. He's a smart, intellectual quarterback, but he's not one in the way of physical tools, much like Trey Lance and Zach Wilson and Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence were in this past quarterback class. So I don't know what to think about this pick from a fan standpoint, because I personally I don't like the upside of a guy like Kyle Trask, but when you're talking about him as a player and how he fits into the Bruce Arians scheme, again, I don't think it's personally a great fit because he doesn't have a huge arm, which we know Bruce Arians always covets. But if nothing else, this is a guy that they're looking to groom and develop and teach the mental side of the game. And there's absolutely nobody more perfect to teach him the mental side of the game than Tom Brady, a guy who has not had the mobility advantage that some of the younger quarterbacks in the league have.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on Jalen Darden before we give you replies?
Yeah, Jalen Darden is a guy that is primarily going to play on special teams. I don't think we're going to see him very much involved as a receiver in general, because we know how loaded that receiver core is. They got Mike Evans, they got Chris Godwin, they got Antonio Brown, who they recently re-signed, 5th rounder Tyler Johnson, who probably should have went earlier in that draft, and they got Scotty Miller, who is Captain Clutch, man. That guy just makes plays every time he's on the field. So I think Jalen Darden is going to be their day one kick returner, replacing Jaden Mickens. I think he's going to be their punt returner as well. The real question is, once some of these guys move on, if they do, if Antonio Brown, let's say, hangs it up after this year, are they going to just insert Tyler Johnson into the next kind of Antonio Brown role? Are they going to move Scotty Miller up the depth chart? It's just a very crowded room. I think Jalen Darden is really just buried right now and stuck in kind of a special teams role. He's more so a guy I would just keep on your radar if he is making a huge impact. Maybe he gets some more snaps on offense, but he's a guy it's going to be a special teams situation for him.
Man, I really, really like Tyler Johnson. I loved his limited work last year out of Minnesota. He's going to be a great prospect later on. Bobby, any thoughts on the Buccaneers?
You know what the thing is with Tom Brady, the situation with him is going to make this almost year to year, right? Because next year, technically Chris Godwin is playing on the franchise tag. He could be gone. Antonio Brown, 1-year contract. OJ Howard, who's also coming back, is going to be done after next year. But the thing is, I feel like Tom Brady's just going to be like, hey, I want to come back again. Let's run it back again. And then next thing you know, they'll figure it out, and then these guys will come. So I think from a dynasty perspective, you're kind of on hold with guys like even Scotty Miller. I think a lot of people forget he was a very productive player for them last year too. So, I think for this year, though, how many teams can return 22 off starters? It's just insane. I just think that Tom Brady started clicking. That second half of the year, he was just in the zone. I think I'm still buying all these Bucs. I know they brought Antonio Brown back. I know they brought Chris Godwin. They have, Mike Evans, and they have OJ Howard. But at the same time, for me, I'm just thinking in my head, I think Tom Brady could get even better. We've seen Carson Palmer, other quarterbacks in their second season under Bruce Arians really make a statistical leap, which is just could you only imagine another 2007, another Randy Moss year, I guess. But I don't think that's going to happen. But at the same time, that's why I'm really excited about the Bucs, because I still believe they can make even more improvements, or at least continue to build on that second half of the season.
I absolutely agree.
From Scotty Miller's perspective, he's such an interesting case too, because he was actually their leading receiver before they signed Antonio Brown, and they put him on the bench once they signed Antonio Brown, obviously. So he's a guy that I don't think gets enough love from dynasty circles, from NFL circles. All he did was make impact plays, and he's a guy that is Tom Brady really has a lot of faith in too, which is really not surprising, knowing Tom Brady's history with small white receivers. But nonetheless, I think with Tom Brady, you're looking at a year-over-year situation, as you mentioned. But man, this guy's like psychotic in the head. I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. He's proven he's the GOAT, and he still doesn't care. He wants to add a third Hall of Fame caliber section of his career to his full length 22 years or whatever that he's been in the NFL.
Yeah,
are we buying any of these guys? Are we buying any of these guys, you think? Like, Sky, would you buy, I guess, like a third-round rookie pick? Or
Godwin
something?
is the number one buy in Dynasty for me right now, because you mentioned, how does a team bring back all 22 starters? Mike Greenberg and Jason Light and Jackie Davidson are the reason. Before the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were any good, they've been the best salary cap management team in the entire league. And if you don't believe me, you can go and look on Spot Track or on Over the Cap and look at how their contracts are structured. These guys will never be in salary cap hell. And I think Chris Godwin, if people are like, oh, well, he's going to be moving on to a new team next year, you never know with those kind of situations. Like, what if he goes to like the Jets or like a bad team? His value might go down. No, he's not going anywhere.
Well, I was actually thinking like Scotty Miller. Do we think is this guy's even worth it? Is like, do we see Antonio Brown hanging it up next year if Godwin stays and Mike Evans stays? Is Scotty Miller or a Tyler Johnson even worth a dynasty, like a low value pick?
They're probably depth guys. It's probably going to require an injury or something for them to get on the field and make a big impact. From a long-term perspective, they'd really have to make a big impact for them to just be like, oh yeah, we're going to let Chris Godwin walk in free agency, or once Antonio Brown leaves, we're not going to replace you at all. We're just going to move Tyler up in the depth chart or Scotty up in the depth chart, and they're going to be kind of impact players. I think they're both talented enough to be in that situation. I just don't know how much faith Bruce Arians has in them specifically to just be like, yep, Tyler Johnson, you're wide receiver 3 on this roster now.
Yeah.
Yep, year by year. And Tom Brady could win it again this year, go back-to-back, and then try to three-peat. or if they lose, is he going to say, I'm not going out on a loss, and then come back and try again anyway? So either way, we should see Tom for the next couple of years at least. All right, man, great breakdown on the Buccaneers. Who you got next in the South?
Yeah, this one shouldn't take too long because they didn't really make a whole lot of fantasy relevant moves. But the New Orleans Saints, much to my laughter, because I absolutely despise the New Orleans Saints as a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, but they took Ian Book in the 4th round. I believe his over-under on where he was going to get drafted was like in the 200s. So I found it kind of hilarious that they picked him that high, along with their 1st-round pick, who I thought was a major reach as well. So New Orleans is in a weird situation, obviously, with their quarterbacks. Former a guy of mine that I know very well, and Jameis Winston, presumably expected to win the starting job there. To me, that's what makes the most logical sense, because if Jameis wins the starting job, you can still use Taysom Hill in all the variety of ways that Sean Payton's used to using him. And I know for everybody's Alvin Kamara shares, they want Jameis Winston to be the quarterback as well, and probably for Michael Thomas's sake as well. I think this is a team ready to bounce back from an offensive standpoint, but I think from a winning perspective, from a defensive perspective, their defense is bound to get worse with all the losses that they experience, especially in the secondary. They're a team that's going to be I could see them going 4-12, or I could see them going 11-5 like they have been the past couple of years. So New Orleans is in a tricky situation, but I think if nothing else, they're probably throwing the ball a little bit more than they were the past couple of years.
And deeper. I mean, they're going to be airing it out a little bit more. I mean, Breeze just lost some air out of the ball, and I think that helps Michael Thomas, but it doesn't help the offense overall. Alvin Kamara is obviously the biggest question mark. We'll see what happens there. But Bobby and I have talked ad nauseum about Adam Troutman. We love Adam Troutman because Jameis specifically loves the tight end. Sean Payton loves the tight end. This offense loves the tight end. And Troutman can stretch the field or play that under route. So Troutman's really kind of a later name sleeper guy that I could see being a Mark Andrews, Darren Waller, Logan Thomas of the last few years.
Right.
That could be Adam Troutman for me. Bobby, quick thoughts on the Saints?
You know what the thing is? We're on a holding pattern until we find out is it going to be Taysom Hill or Jameis Winston. I truly, you just drafted Alvin Kamara at 6 in our dynasty league. I just think that in the 4 games with Taysom Hill, we just saw his passing game usage was not sustainable. I mean, he's getting over 100 targets per year with the Saints with Drew Brees, And I just think that he can lose 25 to 30% of his target volume. And last year, he had the same number of carries as Frank Gore. He's not a big volume rusher. So for Alvin Kamara to be a top 5 back, he needs to flirt with that 80 to 100 target range. And I'm not saying that Alvin Kamara is going to become a bum. I just think he's more of a low-end RB1 with Taysom Hill. And I think Jameis Winston at least offers more of a pure pocket passer presence to check down to running backs. And he did check down to Alvin Kamara in his very, very limited, 10 passes. He did throw to Alvin Kamara a lot. So I think we're in a holding pattern with the Saints until we know about the quarterback.
I want to double up on that, Bush, and I'll let you get going here in the South. Jameis, if you dial back to the Buccaneers days with Chris Sims specifically, Jameis also checked down to him. Chris Sims had 70 targets back-to-back seasons, and this guy was out for a quarter of the season each year, but he was kind of one of our sleeper PPR James White light guys for a few years ago, because Jameis was able to sustain him. So Jameis, we know Jameis is the YOLO ball, right? The Mike Evans 80-yard bombs, but Jameis also is going to check it down. And I've said this the day Jameis left Tampa Bay and ended up in New Orleans. Sean Payton is not going to tolerate that. I mean, an interception happens. Drew Brees threw interceptions, but he is not going to tolerate chucking the ball to chuck the ball. 2-3 interception games will not tolerate it. I wrote all this out before I made my pick in a dynasty league we're in. I took Alvin Kamara at number 6 in a dynasty league. It's kind of weird settings. It's full PPR, so I went with Kamara. But in weeks 1 to 10 and 15 to 19, when he played with Drew Brees through the playoffs, he was RB2 behind only Christian McCaffrey. Weeks 11 through 14 with Taysom Hill, he was RB19. And in week 14 only, when they actually used him as a pass catcher, he had 7 receptions on 10 targets. That single game over 16 games would have put him at about 358 PPR points, 22.5 per game, or RB3 behind his self and Dalvin Cook. So I know it's a long shot, but Alvin Kamara still has the ability. Very, very balanced, incredible running back. We saw the 6 touchdown game. Don't expect that. The point is, he's the guy they want in the end zone. I know Michael Thomas was injured a lot of last year, but even 2 years ago, Michael Thomas is the best fantasy player in the league. Alvin Kamara was right behind him, even on a down season. So don't sleep on Kamara too much, especially if Jameis is the boss there. All right, man. Why don't you pick into the squad here?
Can I put your mind in real quick before we get off the New Orleans Saints?
Please.
I talked about this during the season when it was actually happening, but if you go back and look at Alvin Kamara's snap counts when Taysom Hill took over the starting job, there was a period of 3 games where they played Atlanta twice and Denver with no quarterbacks. Like they had Kendall Hinton or whoever was playing that game. And Alvin Kamara was injured. He wasn't practicing. He was, I can't remember exactly what the injury was off the top of my head. I think it was like a knee injury or something like that. And if you got to think from a coaching staff perspective, you're playing the Atlanta Falcons, who had already fired their coach at that point. They were in the dumpster. Your starting running back is banged up, and your starting quarterback, your Hall of Fame caliber quarterback, is currently not on the field. Why are you risking Alvin Kamara's health in those games? You have a capable backup in Latavius Murray, and the snap counts dipping is a real thing for me, and why I think that's what Sean Payton did. Was he just, I'm gonna rest Alvin Kamara a little bit until Drew comes back, so we have him for the playoffs, because we don't want to be having our star running back not on the field for that point in time. And then when you mentioned, I believe it was week 14, when he had a 71% snap share and was back to his normal self, like Taysom Hill started that game. I think that was when he started. Yep. I haven't pulled it up and gone back and looked at the practice reports. I'm going to at some point in the offseason if the Alvin Kamara hate continues, but I'd have no problems taking Alvin Kamara at the top of a redraft league or at the top of a dynasty league. I seriously think it was just an unfortunate coincidence. And if you're able to parse through that and think like a coach and not like a fantasy player, then you're going to realize that Alvin Kamara was just banged up and Sean Payton was doing the right thing for his football team. And you're going to get a discount on Alvin Kamara because people are going to be worried about, especially if Taysom Hill gets the starting job.
I love the take, man. De'Ami Brown, Alvin Kamara, you're firing me up.
Yeah. So to a more interesting fantasy team, and as far as the NFL draft, I talked about Atlanta already, but the Atlanta Falcons took what I would consider a generational tight end prospect, definitely the best tight end prospect I've ever seen in Kyle Pitts. I mean, the dude can do it all. He can stretch the field. He can run routes on the outside. He can run them from the slot. He separates versus corners, DBs, linebackers. It does not matter. This dude is an absolute freak of nature. And we have an interesting kind of impasse with the Atlanta Falcons as a franchise right now, because with their 4th overall pick, they could have decided we have a new regime, out with the old, in with the new. Let's get rid of Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and take Trey Lance or Kyle or Justin Fields or Mac Jones or whoever the quarterback they would have wanted at 4 was. But instead, they decided to stick with their current regime, their current quarterback. Presumably, they're going to stick with Julio Jones. We still don't know what that kind of situation is at right now. But they added a weapon for Matt Ryan, and they also added Jalen Mayfield and Drew Dahlman, 2 offensive linemen, towards the 3rd and 4th round of the draft. One to replace Alex Mack, presumably, and then another interior offensive line presence. So I think with Atlanta, they kind of showed you what they're trying to do. They're trying to win this year. They're trying to elongate Matt Ryan's tenure in Atlanta, and they're using Kyle Pitts to do that. And Kyle Pitts definitely should overtake Hayden Hurst and virtually kill any fantasy value that he had left. And I would imagine if this is not Julio Jones, if Julio Jones doesn't play this year, he's definitely not playing after this year. So from a dynasty perspective, I think Kyle Pitts is set to move into the like X receiver #1 target role within at least the next 2 years, in my opinion.
I like that a lot. Yeah. Bobby, thoughts on the Falcons?
It's going to be the thing with the Kyle Pitts pick is, Arthur Smith is a tight ends coach at Trade, and he came up through the ranks with the Tennessee Titans as a tight end coach. And as soon as he became OC, I know a lot of people don't realize this because Jonnu Smith was fine, but he was legitimately splitting
one of the first 5 games of the year.
Yeah, I mean, he was a low end tight end one for the end of the year, but the thing was he split work with Anthony Firkser 55 to 45 on a target perspective. But if you combine their metrics together, they were the tight end 3 as a duo. And I think Anthony Firkser had a lot more of an impact between the 20s than he should have, but Kyle Pitts is not going to have that problem. So I think Kyle Pitts right away is definitely going to be on the tight end 1 radar. I don't know. I guess a good question is how high are you willing to take Kyle Pitts in a redraft league for 2021? I guess I'll toss it back down to you. Is it top 5? Is it where would you think you'd take Kyle Pitts?
I mean, it's all going to depend on where the ADP actually lies, because he's at a point where he's got the upside to do it his rookie year. If any tight end can break the rookie tight end kind of curse where they're not able to produce right away, it's Kyle Pitts. And I think you mentioned Arthur Smith's ability to use tight ends. He had Jonnu Smith in the slot for 144 snaps last year. He had him out wide for 61 snaps and in the backfield for 22 snaps. So this is a guy that's going to use Kyle Pitts in a variety of ways. He's not just going to throw him at his inline tight end and be like, hey, you're either blocking or running a route. No, like this guy's going to get involved in the game plan. And I think top 12 is a reasonable projection for him as in a redraft league, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the other guy that's really notable here too is Mike Davis. I mean, listen, I think everyone's shocked they didn't come out of this draft with a running back. I talked about this a little bit because the biggest thing that drove I looked at how many guys got 200 touches last year. Mike Davis was only one of 3 guys that had over 40% of their production come from the run game. And that's where he did a lot of his damage in Carolina last year. I don't see them needing to throw it to him that much when they have Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones. So I think I know there's a little bit of excitement because Arthur Smith had Derrick Henry. Even before Derrick Henry, they had like DeMarco Murray, RB1 seasons. Chris Johnson had a monster year with Arthur Smith on the coaching staff. But I just don't see maybe Mike Davis, maybe a low-end RB2. I guess another good question to kick down to you is, where are you thinking Mike Davis is now that he's basically the lead back? Are you willing to take him as a top 18 or top 24 running back this year?
I think he's like every year there's a guy that gets ruined by post-training camp cuts, and I think it's Mike Davis this year. Someone's going to get cut in training camp, whether it's usually it's like Adrian Peterson or like Frank Gore that get cut in training camp, or they sign with a team right before the season starts. And I could totally see everybody who invested like a 9th round pick in Mike Davis in best ball drafts all summer just being collectively shocked that Mike Davis is not going to be the full status workhorse of the Atlanta Falcons. I think the interesting thing to me is that Atlanta literally traded away the pick that was Javonte Williams to the Denver Broncos. To me, that was shocking because they could have just been like, no, Denver, we're going to sit here and pick this guy because from a physical running standpoint, he matches the type of running back that Derrick Henry is. Obviously not with the size that Derrick Henry boasts, but I think Mike Davis has a chance to go into the season as a starter, but I'd be willing to bet they're going to add a post-training camp cut, maybe a second or third or fourth wave of free agency, whatever you want to call it, kind of add in the next couple weeks here, because now you can make free agent additions without it affecting the compensatory formula. So there's no reason for teams not to sign any free agent running backs that might be out there to go with a guy like Mike Davis.
Absolutely. I got all my answers. So we're good.
Attaboy. How about the Panthers?
Yeah, the Panthers are a much more interesting situation as well compared to New Orleans, but Terrace Marshall was the big attraction as far as a fantasy prospect was concerned. And I think the interesting thing about Terrace Marshall, obviously, we know that he was with Joe Brady back in 2019 with the historical LSU Tigers offense, the Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall was kind of the odd man out in that situation. He was a relative unknown at that time, but we learned a lot about him this year. And I think the interesting thing with Joe Brady in 2019 is that Terrace Marshall played 35% of his snaps from the slot at LSU while sharing that slot role with Justin Jefferson, who we know is a very, very good receiver based on his ability to produce in the NFL. In 2020, that number jumped to 82% of his snaps from the slot. And anybody who's been paying attention to Carolina knows that Curtis Samuel was their slot receiver last year, 50, 52, 55% of his snaps. And Curtis Samuel vacates 97 total targets, 851 yards, and 3 touchdowns from the Carolina Panthers offense. And 66 of those targets, 582 of those yards, and 1 of those touchdowns came from the slot. So a lot of people, I would imagine their initial reaction is that Terrace Marshall is going to replace Robbie Anderson once his contract is up a year from now. But what I think Matt Rule and his staff realized is that this guy can be our big slot, the type of role that a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster has in Pittsburgh. And we saw Curtis Samuel featured in that Jefferson Marshall role that Joe Brady ran at LSU. And he finally lived up to his draft billing because, like I mentioned before, Curtis Samuel was always a guy that people had on their sleepers list because of his unrealized air yards and stuff like that. But once he was moved into a situation that he was more comfortable with, he was able to actually produce. And I believe he finished as a top 30 wide receiver in redraft this past year. So with Samuel gone, Joe Brady should likely have Marshall back into that role that he was in at LSU. And coincidentally, too, like their new quarterback, Sam Darnold, his favorite receiver his entire career has been slot receivers, whether it's Jamison Crowder, even back to his USC days with Juju Smith-Schuster. So, I mean, to me, it's all coming full circle. And whether he replaces Robbie Anderson on the outside a year from now, whether he stays in the slot a year from now, I think he's a phenomenal fit for this offense.
I think that's a great call, man. And Bobby and I have talked a lot about big slot receivers when you get, Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, even. He's primarily outside, of course, but Keenan Allen is a bigger slot guy. You put those people in the slot, it's an immediate mismatch. They can run away from linebackers. They can out-muscle most corners. And if you bring a free safety down to take care of a bigger player, you can then take the top off. So the mismatch is right there. I think that's a great call. And Terrace Marshall's a hell of a player.
And real quick, before I get off of Terrace Marshall, a lot of people would be like, oh, why wouldn't they just put DJ Moore in the slot? Because DJ Moore did play in the slot at Maryland, and everyone kind of just assumes that he's a slot receiver. He actually is never used in that way. Like, he never has been in his NFL career. He only played 15% of the snaps from the slot last year, which was the third most on the Panthers, even behind Robbie Anderson, who a lot of people would think is primarily an outside receiver. And the previous regime, when Ron Rivera and Norv Turner were running the Panthers, he wasn't using the slot there either. It was like 12% of the time. So, like I said, I think this is the slot receiver. This is the Curtis Samuel replacement. It's not Shi Smith, who they took from South Carolina in the 6th round, who I guess is kind of interesting. I'm not really all that interested in him. He's more of like a deep league stash in a dynasty league or a taxi squad type of guy. But I seriously think they're going to shift more towards a big slot in 2021.
I agree.
1,000%. Yeah, 1,000%. The one thing I will say that this little wrinkle about this whole thing is that Robbie Anderson was actually extremely productive from the slot last year. He did have over 30% of his snaps inside, and he actually was 5th in the NFL in yards per route run from the slot. So he was very productive. So it could be because is it true that Marshall was a better on the outside than inside at LSU? What's your feedback on that?
No, I think he was better from the slot. A lot better,
okay,
to be honest.
Right.
I think from a prospect perspective, I wasn't the highest person on Terrace Marshall. I thought he needed some work to do beating press coverage with some he wasn't the most physical guy, which is surprising because he has the size to be the most physical guy on the field, but he kind of got overpowered on the outside a little bit. And I thought he was a lot more fluid on the inside, if that makes any sense, because he just didn't have the kind of quick twitch, like nuanced route running to play on the outside. So I think honestly, he fits better in the slot. And I know Joe Brady will be creative with these guys. He'll move. Sometimes he'll have Marshall on the outside and Robbie in the slot and all that stuff. But when you have a mismatch of 3 receivers like that, that's the type of thing you can get away with, right? And like I said, even if this year Terrace Marshall has a bit more of a down rookie season because he was a bit more of a raw prospect coming out, by next year, he should be the number 2 in that offense, assuming Robbie Anderson moves on, but they could also re-sign him as well. So you never know. I think he can establish a slot role right away, though.
Gotcha. And what are your thoughts on Tommy, this tight end they took in the 3rd round? Is he any prospect for as a pass catcher? Because last year, Ian Thomas was like a non-factor, like 31 targets. So do you think he could have a bigger role, and will that impact the wide receiver trio?
Yeah, I'm pulling up Tommy Tremble's athletic scores right now because I actually have him. This guy's a good athlete, man. He has 107.45 weight adjusted speed score, which is a very indicative thing for tight ends. He's a guy that was clearly like just buried in the depth chart at Notre Dame. He had Cole Kmet, obviously, who was a 2nd round pick of Chicago Bears a couple of years ago, I believe last year, and Michael Mayer, who's like the best tight end recruit prospect out of high school in like a long time. So this was a guy that doesn't have the production profile that you want to see from a college tight end, but he does have the athletic profile that you want to see from a college tight end. So Matt Rule loves speed. Every time I've heard a Matt Rule interview, he just talks about speed and being athletic and give me athletes and I'll teach them how to play football type of coach. So if Tommy Tremble takes a year, which he can definitely do because he's got Dan Arnold ahead of him on the depth chart and he's got Ian Thomas still ahead of him on the depth chart. I believe both of those guys are gone after this year. So from a dynasty perspective, Tommy Tremble's a guy, perfect taxi squad pick. Just draft him, throw him on your taxi squad for a year, and he should be good to go in 2022.
Cool.
I think that's a great call. And you remember Matt Rule at Baylor, right? In the Big 10, or Big 12, I guess you're running and gunning all day long, right? And
right.
He likes that spread offense. All right, boys, before we get into it, I want to give a quick shout out to Bomb Banana hot sauce. Banana based, not banana flavored. Yo, this stuff is absolutely delicious. We just had a bunch of Bomb Banana hot sauce on our draft goodies. The missus uses it. We had some house-made tacos from my daughter the other night. We put some on those. It was absolutely delicious. 4 roommates, good buddies out of the University of Michigan. Shouts out to the Michigan Wolverines. Go Blue. Created this Bomb Banana hot sauce. Again, banana infused, not banana flavored hot sauce. They just had a great feature article in Forbes magazine. That's right, folks. The Forbes magazine. These guys had a great shout out in there, so you can check out that article. Go to seekthespice.com, and on your order, make sure you use the promo code TCK for 10% off of your order, and they can send you out a handful of bottles. I have them right behind me. I like to show these off every time. Right here with the red sauce. We were just talking about Bush pre-show here. He's a spice guy. He likes his hot wings. He likes spice over flavor sometimes. We've got the muy muy. We've got the bland as well. I'm more of a flavor than a spice guy, but I respect the spice too. So go to seekthespice.com. Bomb Banana hot sauce, banana infused, banana based, not banana flavored. All right, boys, I'm going to jump in here to the NFC West. I'll go through mine kind of quickly here. I've talked about the Niners at nauseum, but we haven't had Bush on for his reactions. We'll start here, of course. It was basically the talk of the draft until Aaron Rodgers. We knew Trevor Lawrence was going 1. We basically knew Zach Wilson was going 2. The big question was going to be number 3. Was it going to be Trey Lance? Was it going to be Mac Jones? Would it be maybe Justin Fields? Would they then make a trade for Aaron Rodgers, bringing him in? A lot was going on. They eventually settled on Trey Lance out of North Dakota State. I love this pick. I've been saying for the last couple of weeks that if we could get Colin Kaepernick coming out of Nevada, raw, smaller school, multi-level talented dual threat quarterback, we can get Colin Kaepernick to start and turn in to Dak Prescott in 3 or 4 years, I would be absolutely over the moon if Trey Lance ends up being that guy. They also bring in Trey Sermon out of Ohio State and Elijah Mitchell out of Louisiana. Dweez is always talking on the podcast here about Elijah Mitchell. There's mixed feelings about Trey Sermon. The Niners already have 4 running backs plus Kyle Juszczyk. Very, very busy here. So there's no redraft excitement, maybe out of all 3 of these guys. Trey Lance has a chance to kind of do a Justin Herbert eventually, but he's not going to be Joe Burrow from last year and start right away and come off the top. I just don't think that'll happen with Jimmy. Trey Sermon and Elijah Mitchell, though, could add a lot of value in dynasty leagues, but you may just have to sit on them for a year or 2. Raheem Mostert could be gone. Jeff Wilson, if he doesn't pan out, could be gone. We can definitely see JaMychal Hasty end up leaving as well. And Wayne Gallman came in as a depth piece before these 2 draft picks, so he could be gone as well next year. So there is a chance that Trey Sermon and Elijah Mitchell are running things for San Francisco. And if that's the case, I want both of these guys with different skill sets. So, Bush, I'll kick it to you first, man. Any thoughts on what the 49ers did with Lance, Sermon, or Mitchell?
Real quick, the guy that you just mentioned, Wayne Gallman, that's the guy that's going to ruin Mike Davis. When he gets cut in training camp,
I was just thinking the same thing.
He's literally going to Atlanta, and they're going to – the two handcuffs from last year are going to be in the same backfield, Wayne Gallman and Mike
you're not going to want either one of them, but they'll both be valuable. Yeah,
right, totally. Right. So I've said this before. You follow me on Twitter. You probably know this. Trey Lance is my 101 in Superflex leagues.
Let's go.
And the reason is because I'm a big believer of nurture over nature. I think the nest, quote unquote, for the quarterback position is the most important out of any position in all of sports. That means the franchise as a whole, the ownership, the stability, the historic nature of the franchise. If they're a winning franchise, losing franchise, whatever. Then you get down to the front office, the coaching staff, the weapons around them, the protection around them, the running backs behind them. All that stuff plays into a quarterback's success. And when you look back over the past couple of drafts, Justin Herbert, Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, all these guys went to teams that were already winning games. They had to trade up in most cases for these guys because they won too many games the previous season. And those guys, a lot of them, especially Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, were project quarterbacks. They weren't ready-made studs that we know they are now. They were project quarterbacks, and they went to good situations. And I think when you compare Trey Lance to Trevor Lawrence, who is the consensus 101 for Dynasty Superflex amongst the entire industry, because Trevor Lawrence has probably been the 101 for the last 3 years for most people. Trevor Lawrence is an A+ level prospect, but in my opinion, he went to a C+ level landing spot. Whereas,
100% agree.
Right.
I'm with you on
Whereas Trey Lance is an A- level prospect who went to a A+ level landing spot with Brandon Ayuk, with Deebo Samuel, with the bookend tackles that he has, with George Kittle, with Kyle Shanahan calling up a run scheme. Everything about Trey Lance is awesome. And on top of all that, Trey Lance gives you something that Trevor Lawrence gives you to some extent, but not at the 1,200 yards and 17 rushing touchdowns that Trey Lance gave you at North Dakota State last year. So dual threat rushing quarterback. We've only seen this one other time in Kyle Shanahan's offense. And the guy won Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he was the QB3 in fantasy that year. And also, coincidentally enough, was traded up for with 3 first-round picks and went behind a generational prospect in the draft. So to me, it's all tying together. This dude, I compared him to Steve McNair. I think he's super talented. I think he has the kind of out-of-structure plays that they've been missing for the last couple of years. The reason that they lost in that Super Bowl was because of an out-of-structure play by Patrick Mahomes to Tyreek Hill, and Kyle Shanahan got his guy.
Man, I mean, like, Bush, that was – I'm
it,
emotional. Man. I love it. I love it. It's like I said the same thing. I was, like, thinking –
Fire me up, bro.
Yep. Like, that's perfect. Yeah, I can't break it down any better. I think the one thing I will say, though, is I think there's people overlook sometimes that – sometimes coaching staffs like to bring in a guy a year before they know all their other players are going to go, right? So we know Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, they're all UDFAs, free agents next year. So why not get Trey Sermon in there and get him on the system so that he can hit the ground running in 2022? Yep. Now listen, Raheem Mostert, when he plays, is awesome. We all know that. He just can't stay healthy. So I think adding depth to this running back room has to happen. We saw too many injuries over and over again. I guess the other question I do have, though, is George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. How do you guys feel about their value with Trey Lance if he gets to start? Let's say he does start week 1.
Fantastic.
How do you feel about those guys?
Very good. I feel very good about it. He's going to open the playbook. The run game's fresh. The offensive line's healthy. Defensive line is healthy. Everyone's got their position. And again, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but I'm going to keep saying this because when it goes off, I want to have the receipts for this. Jalen Hurd, in my opinion, is still the best receiver in San Francisco, and he hasn't even played yet. So they're able to get him going on. I think he's going to be just fine. So the 49ers in 2000, I'm going to throw out last year. Last year for the Niners was a train wreck. Everybody was hurt, rotational running backs. I'm just going to get rid of last year. 2019, on the way to the Super Bowl, the 49ers were second in rush attempts and rushing yards behind only the Ravens, and they led the league in rushing touchdowns as a team. I think they can absolutely do that again this year and for the next couple of years, assuming guys stay healthy. All right, guys, we're getting long.
Scott, one question. Ayuk or Samuel? Who you guys got?
Ayuk.
I have Ayuk as well. I see, here's the thing with this offense. From a dynasty perspective, I will invest everything I got in this offense because I think it's going to be a top 3 unit. Chiefs 1B, like legitimately. I think this is, you
Totally
want your Debo Samuel shares, you want your Brandon Ayuk shares, you want your George Kittle shares. And I don't want any of the running backs because I know how Kyle Shanahan operates. When it's third down and short, he gets his third down and short back out there. When it's a goal line situation, he gets his goal line back out there. When it's a receiving situation, he gets his receiving back out there. And you're never going to guess who it is on any given week. So Trey Sermon, completely out on. He's going way too high for my liking. He's like a back end of the first round pick in some rookie drafts, which is absolutely absurd in my opinion. He was a guy that I wasn't all that high on going into the draft. And it's a good landing spot for him from a individual production standpoint. But if anybody's expecting this guy to turn into a top 5, top 10 running back, it's never going to happen in Kyle Shanahan's offense. He's a guy who's going to be in RB2 territory if he is the feature guy, which I still think Raheem Mostert's the more talented running back.
And the rushing offense for the 49ers is great for the NFL, mixing up your running backs like we've seen the frustrating Patriots do forever. It's great for NFL, frustrating for fantasy. Bush, right. I 100% agree there. All right, guys, we're long in the tooth here. I'm going to blaze through the next couple of teams, the Cardinals, Rams, and Seahawks. And actually, none of them, in my opinion, with the exception of maybe Rondale Moore, had any big fantasy relevance. So I'm going to break the mold a little bit. I'm going to give you all three of these teams rundown quick. We'll get your feedback and we'll get out of here. We'll start with the Cardinals here in the second round. Rondale Moore out of Purdue. A lot of question marks from him. Phenomenal athlete. Injury concerns. 4.3 40. Benches over 600 pounds. Squatted 600 pounds. Deep threat or run in the slot. Taken over from my man Larry Fitz, or he can play deep. Andy Isabella has been a player that fantasy folks have wanted to be a thing. He's kind of the Scotty Miller on the other side for the Cardinals. He's just not going to be it. Nuke Hopkins is Nuke Hopkins, of course, but Christian Kirk, like up and down as well. If Rondale Moore can stay healthy, is he going to be able to be that playmaker the Cardinals offense really has been looking for outside of Nuke Hopkins? We'll go to the Rams. Tutu Atwell, another small receiver, was arguably the best slot receiver. I would argue so there's some other options there, but very small as we know, only 149 pounds or something as he came in. But Josh Reynolds is gone. Okay, Josh Reynolds leaves, who I've actually liked a lot since he came out of Texas A&M with the Rams. He's just been buried behind Kupp and Woods for years. 176 vacated targets. Josh Reynolds is now in Tennessee. By the way, until Julio Jones goes to Tennessee, which will happen in a few months, but we won't talk about that yet, Josh Reynolds, nobody's talking about Josh Reynolds. It's all A.J. Brown, which I'm all about A.J. Brown. But Josh Reynolds in like the 12th round of a redraft league because nobody even knows who he is, take that, please, to the bank. Because even if Julio comes in, you're willing to wash it out. And Gerald Everett, Bobby's man, another deep tight end in Seattle now. So 176 vacated targets is all Kupp and Woods and run game. We know that. But with Matt Stafford coming in now as the quarterback for the Rams, I think it's wheels up for this offense. They had a couple other guys here, Jacob Harris, Jake Funk, and then Ben Swogenreck. I don't see any of those guys becoming fantasy relevant anytime soon. And then finally with the Seahawks, Dwayne Eskridge, another, I think, great player if he gets the opportunity, but of course it's going to be Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf all day long. He was the state of Indiana Mr. Track in 2016 in high school. He adds another deep threat for Russ. And look, I don't think that this pick is going to let Russ cook, quote unquote, that we saw for the first half of last year, because the problem was Seattle was losing those games. Dak Prescott in the Cowboys offense was phenomenal for fantasy football. Guess what? They were losing those games. Jerry Jones doesn't care. Pete Carroll doesn't care, right? They need to win those games. They weren't. They run the ball in Seattle. They're going to continue to do that. The efficiency is going to be sky high, but the volume is going to be rock bottom. So I don't expect Dwayne Eskridge to come in and out of nowhere be catching all these deep bombs. But you did have David Moore, who was kind of a best ball guy, a deep threat on occasion, DFS player at least, able to catch deep bombs. And we know that when Russ throws it, he's throwing it 30, 40 yards, and it can't all be DK and Tyler Lockett. So I know it's a mouthful, guys. Let's run through real quick. Bush, we'll start with you. Rondale Moore with the Cardinals, Tutu Atwell with the Rams, and Dwayne Eskridge out of Western Michigan for the Seahawks.
You summed it up perfectly with Eskridge. Best ball guy only. That's exactly how I feel about him. From a dynasty perspective, I mean, Tyler Lockett just reached a new agreement with him. I believe it was last offseason. So It's not even like you could be like, oh, he's the new Tyler Lockett a couple years from now. But I mean, who the heck knows with the Seahawks? They took the chef cleaver right out of Russ's hands about halfway through the season last year. So I mean, maybe Dwayne Eskridge is an implication that they're going to go towards a bit more of a pass-heavy scheme, but it's Pete Carroll. Anytime he gets in front of a microphone, talks about how much he wants to run the ball. So, And they re-signed Chris Carson to prove how much they want to run the ball, and they were sniffing around Leonard Fournette and a number of other free agents. So, I think exactly how you said it with Eskridge is exactly how I feel about it. Tutu Atwell weighs as much as I do. Next, I don't care. Like, we're talking about Devontae Smith being underweight. Tutu Atwell weighed 149 pounds in Indianapolis, which is literally like actually less than I weigh, which is insane to me. So there's no chance in hell. I don't care that they picked him in the second round. There's no chance in hell this guy's going to be fantasy relevant. Maybe he's, again, much like Dwayne Eskridge, a best ball guy. Maybe he gets involved at some point in the deep game, in the short game. He's just a guy I'm willing to let other people just chase the draft capital on. I just don't believe in him as a player. And then Rondale Moore was a guy that I had been well documented lower on than other people, but the guy's a freak athlete. He is probably pound for pound the best athlete in the entire draft, maybe sans Jalen Waddle. But Rondale Moore is going to a situation that a lot of people are ticketing for fantasy superstardom, right? They're like, oh, but like Cliff Kingsbury, creative offensive mind, that's all we wanted for Rondale Moore. But the problem is that Rondale Moore will always be a guy that needs to be scheme touches. When you look at his kind of receiving depth chart or receiving chart, according to Pro Football Focus, he basically got like 80% of his work close to the line of scrimmage, where he was getting drags and screens and bubbles and carries and stuff. And part of that is because Purdue's quarterback was terrible. But another part of that was that that's how they used Rondale Moore. And they're the coaching staff. They should know how to use this guy best. And the number of times that he did get used in the deep game, he's 5'7". Like, he's a small guy. It's hard for him to be used in that way. So yes, I'm excited about it. It's better than him going to like the Giants where he's got Jason Garrett calling plays for him, but no offense. But
we know Bush. It's cool. We know.
Right. But Cliff Kingsbury hasn't shown us that he's some elite offensive mind. It's not like he went, I actually would, the place I wanted him to go was actually the place that my dude in the draft went, where Elijah Moore went for the New York Jets. That's where I wanted Rondale Moore to go, because I thought Mike LaFleur, serving as the passing game coordinator for the 49ers these last couple of years, would have known how to use a guy like Rondale Moore. Whereas Cliff Kingsbury is kind of like he's like a Walmart version of Sean McVay. Everyone thinks he's a great offensive coordinator, but he hasn't really shown us that yet.
Love it. I love the Walmart version.
and so far, with the Walmart reference, he's also cheaper because he hasn't been to a Super Bowl. So well done.
True.
Right.
True.
You get 2 points on that. Bobby, last comments here on those 3 players.
Yeah, just Eskridge. I guess my question, he's like 5'9", 190. Is he going to be suited to play on the outside? I know Lockett played a lot, and that's what he does. But tell me your thoughts on, is he going to kick inside more? Is that going to push Lockett outside? Or do you think he's going to have to figure it out wide, take over for David Moore?
That's why the pick just doesn't make any sense, right? Like,
Gotcha.
That's why we're just like, I don't know, man. Like, Tyler Lockett can play on the outside a little bit, but if he is a primary slot receiver, I think Eskridge is going to make an impact immediately on special teams, of course, because he's got the blazing speed, the track speed. I just don't see how they're going to use this guy. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think they're going to try and add a veteran receiver at some point in the offseason, whether it's, I don't know if they're sniffing around Josh Gordon still or something like that, but get a third receiver, a veteran, and use Dwayne Eskridge sparingly in the offense. Yeah. Probably a DFS showdown guy, a best ball guy, but that's about the extent I see him. Unless something happens with Lockett in the next couple of years, I just don't see how he's going to get involved in the offense. And he's a guy from a prospect standpoint that had a number of red flags all over the place, including the fact that he wasn't really all that productive until this year, and he's like 23 years old.
Yeah. So the one thing I noticed when I looked at his size, I thought Gerald Everett, because of his connection to the new OC, Shane Waldron, he does have a leg up on everybody else because he does know the offense, which is surprising for a guy coming in. I think Gerald Everett could carve out a better role in the red zone because they're going to have Metcalf, obviously. And Tyler Lockett, for his size, is fantastic in the red zone. Makes no sense. But Gerald Everett, I think this pick actually solidifies Gerald Everett a little bit more because he can carve out a role in the middle of the field and in the red zone. Now, moving to the Rams, I think it starts and ends with Matthew Stafford. I think this pick is great. Keep giving him more talent. But if I'm going to go best ball, I know this is probably a bad take, but I would just take Deshaun Jackson, the last pick. You know, because D-Jax, if he stays healthy, we've seen him blow up. You know, he always has one game a year, right? He could win you one game when he blows up and gets hurt the next week. But, I just think that from that standpoint, this Tutu Atwell kid, when I actually looked at all the recent stats between the picks I talked a little bit earlier. It's less than a 50-50 that these guys work out in the second round for receivers. So I might fade him completely, but I think just Stafford being there. I personally just think that don't fade Robert Woods, don't fade Cooper Kupp, just ride those guys. Those are the guys you want. And then Rondale Moore with the Arizona Cardinals, I think you hit it on the head. Cliff Kingsbury is a Walmart version of Sean McVay. I wonder if he's a Walmart version of Chip Kelly in the NFL. With this is how things have gone so far. But the thing I will say about Rondale Moore is if you're starting to see him in the second, maybe even he's not going to fall to the third, but in the second round of rookie drafts, what is notable? Christian Kirk is a free agent next year. AJ Green is a free agent next year. So him coming in, he could immediately become. If you see any flashes this year, he could be a valuable pick next year when he gets the number 2 job because they don't have a pass-catching tight end. They let Dan Arnold walk. So I think overall, Rondale Moore, it's definitely not a year I'm going to invest in him, but I'll be watching him throughout the year to see if he's worth it in 2022.
Yeah, he's going to be a guy that I just let other people pick. Like, I'll rank him where I got him ranked. I think if he falls to a certain point, I'll pick him. But this is a guy we're talking about going in the early second round consistently of Superflex rookie drafts. And to me, I would much rather have De'Ami Brown than him. I would much rather have Terrace Marshall than him. I would much rather have even Amon-Ra St. Brown than him. So he's just a guy I'm just going to bypass. I'm just going to let somebody else make that mistake. And hopefully he's got his truthers. So I'm sure people will take him for you if you don't want to deal with him. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think his rookie year, he's probably not going to have that big of an impact. I know they run more 4 wide receiver sets over the last 2 years than any other team, but even still, was anybody interested in Keyshawn Johnson or Andy Isabella the last couple of years just because they ran 4 receiver sets? Obviously, he's a more talented player than those guys, but still, I don't think the volume is going to be there for that offense. We know Hopkins is going to get his. We know, Chase Edmonds is probably going to have a similar role to what you could imagine for Rondale Moore anyway. So that's an interesting kind of wrinkle that I've also noticed as well.
Let's get Bush's opinion on Chase Edmonds. What do you think about it? They didn't go out and get a high-profile rookie running back. They brought in James Conner. What's your thoughts?
I actually made a trade in a dynasty league right before the draft because I didn't expect them to let Chase Edmonds be the dude. I traded away Michael Thomas and Chase Edmonds for the 105 and the 111. And then I actually ended up making a separate trade where I moved up from the 111 to the 107. But anyways, I think Chase Edmonds is probably going to be what Chase Edmonds has already been, but a little bit better than that probably. He's probably looking more at a ceiling similar to Tariq Cohen a couple of years ago or to James White a couple years ago. So I think James Conner is going to be involved or whoever else they add to that backfield because I do think they could still add another veteran to that backfield. It's going to be probably a committee with Chase Edmonds being the most valuable, especially in any kind of PPR.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a great call. I was just going to mention that they bring in James Conner, so they have 2 pass-catching running backs, which might affect a little bit. I didn't even mention Green when I was talking about the Cardinals because I just think he's going to be a sub piece at this point in a red zone option. So awesome, man. Hey, Bush, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. I know we've been trying to do this for a long time. Thank you for coming on. Incredible insight. Always love your work. Always rooting for you guys over at the Stock Exchange. Thank you for everything that you do for the fantasy community and your hosting credentials as well. Before we get out of here, man, please let the TCK Potters know where they can find all of your content.
Yeah, like I said, you can follow me on Twitter at Football Stock. You can check out all of the stuff that we're doing on YouTube, youtube.com/the Fantasy Stock Exchange. The FantasyStockExchange.com is our draft guide. We got a pretty exciting announcement coming in the next couple of days regarding our season-long draft guide that will be dropping probably around mid-July. So stay tuned for that. Follow me on Twitter, and I'm sure I'll be the one who announces that. And you can follow my co-host as well at DannyFootball59. We're cranking out content pretty much nonstop, so make sure you guys stick around with us.
We have 17 games now in the NFL. Buccaneers record prediction.
I think they win 13 or 14 probably.
Whew. And then probably, 4 more after that? Well, no, because they won't have the wild card.
I'm not sure. They could have a hangover. Could be like an 11-12 win team that gets ousted in the second round. Who the heck knows? But hopefully they go back-to-back.
Awesome, man. Well, best of luck to your Bucks, man. It's been a pleasure to have you on. We'll definitely be doing this again soon. Shouts out to the Fantasy Stock Exchange, you and Danny and the rest of the crew. Thank you for coming on. Bobby Lamarco, a.k.a. Fantasy Football X Factor. Always a pleasure as well. My name is Sky Guasco, host of the TCK Pod, Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast, episode 387, Rookie Rundown in the books. Catch us next week. We'll be breaking down the rest of the divisions. And until next time, shouts out to the Jersey Jungle and Bomb Banana Hot Sauce. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Enjoy yourself. We'll catch you next week. For Bush, Bobby, I'm your host, Sky Guasco, and we'll catch you next time. We are out of here.